Many people who defend PewDiePie on the basis of the right to freedom of speech fail to recognize the fact that Europe generally doesn't have a freedom of speech, or more precisely, many European countries have strict hate speech and libel laws. PewDiePie publicly saying a racial slur in a derogative way could get him into a serious trouble, and I'm not talking about the PC outrage, I mean serious legal ramifications. European authorities don't play nicely with this kind of behavior. In Scotland, for example, someone was jailed over a negative Facebook post about immigrants. In Germany, police raid homes over social media comments, and people there can get significant prison time for violating hate speech laws. PewDiePie did say derogative terms in the past and got away with it with much smaller backlash than today. But the real problem for him might not be that he could lose some subscribers or monetization of his videos. He could face a sentence over his remarks. According to the United Kingdom Public Order Act 1986, which applies to England where PewDiePie lives, a person guilty of an offense under this part is liable, on conviction, on indictment, to imprisonment for a term not exceeding 7 years, or a fine, or both. On summary conviction, to imprisonment for a term not exceeding 6 months, or a fine not exceeding the statutory maximum, or both. A person who could be charged for such offenses is a person who uses threatening, abusive, or insulting words or behavior, or displays any written material which is threatening, abusive, or insulting, is guilty of an offense if he intends thereby to stir up racial hatred, or, having regard to all the circumstances, racial hatred is likely to be stirred up thereby. So let's look at how PewDiePie N-word could be legally regarded in this case. He did say a derogative term, which can be considered threatening and abusive, but in his case, he specifically used it as an insult. But that's not enough. His intent matters. Did he intend to stir up racial hatred? I think this charge against him wouldn't be successful, although he did apologize, but he did so extremely poorly, with laughing it off. Also, PewDiePie's history of jokes about Nazi Germany could make it harder for him to defend his intent, despite expressively distancing himself from the far right. The second point, however, is the one I think he won't get out of. Having regard to all the circumstances, racial hatred is likely to be stirred up thereby. This is basically making a person responsible for other people's behavior based on their remarks. The word likely only muddies the waters even more. What is considered to be likely is open to extremely broad interpretation. A judge could interpret PewDiePie's case as a hate-inducing behavior, and they could make Felix liable for normalizing hate speech. Now, what could PewDiePie's defense be? He has two options according to the law, one of which is completely out of question for him, and the other one might save him from having his life destroyed. If he said derogative slurs in his private place where no one else would hear those words except for those inside that dwelling at the time, he'd be safe. He could also get away if he proved he was not aware to be heard or seen by someone outside of that dwelling. PewDiePie was in his private place, but he was live streaming for dozens of thousands of people. This is a clear case against him. His second and the only option for defense would be to prove his words were not intended to stir up racial hatred or to be threatening, abusive, or insulting. Judges would have to determine whether this apology,
"I'm really sorry if I offended, hurt, or disappointed anyone,"
is enough to prove his intent was not a racial insult. Using his words, he probably didn't threaten anyone and probably didn't abuse anyone. But insult is a very broad, general way to describe an offense, and PewDiePie's act could well fall into this category. But there is so much more into this story. Last year, the European Union, together with major technology companies including Facebook, Microsoft, Twitter, and YouTube, signed a Code of Conduct, a hate speech policing procedure to combat unwanted content on the internet. This conduct mandates signatories to remove or disable access to content that currently falls under illegal hate speech in a European Union member state within 24 hours. The document, however, doesn't specify limits of what a removal of such a content really means. There is nothing to say whether this should label only PewDiePie's livestream video or could impact standing of his entire channel. Conduct specifies that people who decide on the removal notifications are supposed to be trusted reporters or equivalent, without any further clarification on which is which. IT companies are also directed to cooperate between platforms, which means PewDiePie's standing on Facebook, Twitter, and pretty much anywhere else could be jeopardized. The worst case scenario that could happen is that PewDiePie's channel will have restricted access in Europe. The European Union doesn't have the authority to delete his channel, but with this hate speech law, it could have the power to destroy his career. The bottom line is that PewDiePie chose a wrong country to upload his videos from. If he was in the United States, no institution would be going after him. Europe doesn't have the culture for free speech and certainly doesn't have the laws for free speech. it's possible that he will get away legally, which will be his luckiest day ever. After that, I would suggest him to move to the United States immediately. I think if PewDiePie had only 1 million subscribers, this wouldn't have been in headlines on more than 3 websites. But since he is where he is often a scapegoat that is wanted to be held accountable for all the damage advertising controversy has done to YouTube. Even by the US laws, he does have a freedom of speech, but he doesn't have to be paid for that freedom. He might lose a lot of monetization features on his channel, including taking donations from his livestream audience. Let's hope he didn't spend all of his money on expensive whiskey. What is your take on this story? Do you feel like PewDiePie violated some European laws? I hope this video helped you clarify the European perspective on PewDiePie's N-word controversy and free speech in general. I think what's more important about this case is not PewDiePie, but the value of the freedom of speech itself in Western democracy. We need to have a conversation about this, but without emotions and political agenda. Freedom of speech affects us all, irrespective of political affiliations. Please comment and subscribe for more coverage of insanity on the cyberspace in the future.